Thank you for attending the 4th Josiah Henson Leadership Conference, and thank you to everyone joining us on the live stream. Thanks to Montgomery Community Media for once again hosting this important leadership conference. I am Mike Nordalilli, the Executive Director of the Montgomery Parks Foundation. Catherine Leggett, who chairs the Foundation's Josiah Henson Capital Campaign Committee, couldn't be with us today. The Montgomery Parks Foundation raises private funds that supplement, not supplant, taxpayer support for the 421 parks in Montgomery County. After you hear about the inspiring story of Josiah Henson today, you will understand why our highest priority is raising funds to build a museum and education center on the very soil where Henson was enslaved off of Old Georgetown Road in North Bethesda. If you would like to help us share Henson's remarkable journey of freedom with others, please contact the Montgomery Parks Foundation at montgomeryparksfoundation.org. The Montgomery Parks Foundation is proud of our partnership with Montgomery Community Media in these Josiah Henson Leadership Conferences. I would note that these conferences have already shaped the themes that will be part of the new Museum and Education Center. During previous conferences, we have discussed Reverend Henson's leadership and how he changed the view of slavery throughout the world. Our panelists have had open discussions about how he helped pave the way for opportunities for all people today. And we have also discussed what progress still needs to be made. But it's important as we educate people on Reverend Henson's story so that we make progress and not regression. June 15th was Reverend Henson's 229th birthday. We had a birthday party for him on Saturday at Josiah Henson Park. The foundation is charged with raising funds for the Josiah Henson Park Museum and Education Center. It is my job to make sure that people never forget this man's inspiring story so we don't have to relive it today. This truly will be the year of Josiah Henson, with 4 books being published and the release of a documentary called Josiah Henson. It is my honor to welcome you here this morning and to welcome our host for the conference today, Ed Reed. Ed is past president of the Montgomery School Counselor Association. Ed.
Yeah, good morning. And just one slight correction, past president of the Maryland School Counselor Association. Well, thank you, Mr. Gnarly. Hello, everyone. My name is Ed Reed, and I'm a high school counselor at Poolesville High School. I've been partnering with MCM for many years to bring programs to you about teen mental health, as well as a show called Congratulations, You're In, which helps high schoolers get into college. I am honored to be your host for this conference. The topic for the first panel is Black Images in Mass Media, starting with Uncle Tom and going to the very successful Black Panthers movie. On the panel today, we have Dr. Hercules Pinckney, President Emeritus at Montgomery College, Wendy Howard, owner and CEO at WH Consulting, as well as Richard Turner, Executive Director at Carroll Community Media Center. They will all come up and say a few words, but first, we have something we would like to share with you. Who was Josiah Henson? A lot of people still don't know the remarkable story of Josiah Henson, and the big part of this story took place in Montgomery County. The Montgomery County Parks Foundation is working hard to tell this story. Here's a little video to get everyone up to date on this man's amazing journey and what Montgomery Parks has done so far.
As a child in Charles County, Maryland, Josiah Henson saw his family sold away from the plantation and out of his life. He almost died from neglect before he was traded onto the Riley plantation in Montgomery County, where his mother lived. Henson never saw his father or many of his siblings again. He sometimes worked in the stables on Riley's plantation. As a strong, intelligent, and resourceful worker, he fast became one of the owner's most loyal and trusted enslaved laborers. Riley once had Henson lead a group of slaves on a journey to Kentucky through the Free State of Ohio without supervision. None of them, not even Henson himself, attempted to run away. While enslaved, Henson converted to Christianity, married, and began saving money to buy his own freedom. But when Riley cheated Henson out of his savings and threatened to sell him, he escaped to freedom in Canada with his wife and children. There, he helped to establish Dawn, Ontario, a settlement for fugitive slaves from the United States. He later dictated his life story to a local writer. The Life of Josiah Henson, formerly a slave, now an inhabitant of Canada, was published in 1849. 3 years later, Harriet Beecher Stowe patterned Uncle Tom's story on Josiah Henson's real life in her novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly. In Stowe's novel, the slave master kills Tom for refusing to reveal the location of 2 female slaves. Stowe's fictional account of slavery was a blockbuster hit. In reality, Reverend Josiah Henson lived a long and full life, becoming a successful businessman, community leader, international speaker, and a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Impressed by his story, Stowe wrote the preface for the next edition of Henson's book. Henson became known as the original Uncle Tom. His fame spread, and the community of former slaves in Canada grew. On a trip to England to raise funds to help the Dawn settlement, Reverend Josiah Henson was presented to Queen Victoria. Yet, despite Henson's honorable life, Uncle Tom has taken on derogatory meanings through the years. But nothing could be further from the truth. In Harriet Beecher Stowe's fictional novel, Tom was a martyr. The real Uncle Tom, Reverend Josiah Henson, was a Maryland hero.
Now, we'll hear our panelists' thoughts on today's topic, Black images in mass media from Uncle Tom to Black Panther, the movie. Our first speaker is Hercules Pinckney. Hercules is President Emeritus of Montgomery College, and he currently serves on the board of directors at Holy Cross Hospital. He graduated cum laude from Claflin College and earned a master's degree in education from South Carolina State College, and he earned his doctorate of education from Virginia Tech. Hercules is an adherent activist, a brilliant Renaissance man, and his fascinating history includes major contributions to the civil rights movement. Welcome, Hercules. Please come up.
Thank you so much, Ed. Good morning.
Good morning.
What an honor it is for me to share this morning with you as we continue these very critically needed Josiah Henson leadership conferences. We need a more accurate American history, including Montgomery County, so that we are not misled by the inaccurate portrayals and the downright omissions of mainstream media of positive Black images from Uncle Tom to Black Panther. Your presence here this morning signifies that we are all in agreement that the preservation of the true legacy and untold history of our people is important. My remarks are from my civil rights perspective of how Black images in the media have impacted my life, and by extension, how these portrayals of Blacks influence the prevalent perceptions and attitudes of American society toward we as a people. I will also draw from a number of other sources, including an article entitled Portrayal of Minorities in the Film, Media, and Entertainment Industries by Uri Horton, Roger Price, and Eric Brown. I was born in the South. I was raised and educated in Orangeburg, South Carolina. Now, for those of you who don't know where Orangeburg is, it is a small college town smack dab in the middle of the state between the capital city of Columbia and Charleston, South Carolina. Orangeburg is significant in civil rights history, in part because it was the site of the Orangeburg Massacre. At 10:33 p.m. on the night of February 8, 1968, 8 to 10 seconds of police gunfire left 3 young black unarmed men dying and 27 others wounded on the campus of South Carolina State College, where I was matriculating toward my master's in education degree. The 3 students who died were Samuel Hammond, Delano Middleton, and Henry Smith. Delano Middleton attended and graduated from Wilkinson High School, the same high school I graduated from 2 years earlier. So I knew his parents, his family. The death of these 3 unarmed students marked the first such tragedy on an American college campus. And this happened more than 2 years before gunfire by National Guardsmen in Ohio killed 4 students at Kent State University. But unlike Kent State, the students killed in Orangeburg were black, and the shooting occurred at night, leaving no compelling TV images. And due to the lack of media coverage, the incident that night hardly pierced the American conscience. It would take decades later before the truth of that horrible night and subsequent actions and inactions were made public. Today, you can Google Orangeburg Massacre and see the black images and read more accurate accounts of the tragedy and its aftermath. Generations since my own would never have known of this local history and legacy had it not been for the diligence of a persistent group of individuals and others who were committed to making known the seemingly lost bit of history. Kind of reminds you of what we're trying to do here with Josiah Henson. The childhood images to which I was exposed through the mainstream media were all negative, whether it were in the newspaper, on the radio, or in the movies, but especially television. It was not until the TV show Julia that I saw a black woman for the very first time who was a professional and not a maid. Black history taught in the segregated schools I attended, and reading Ebony and Jet magazines were my primary sources for positive black images. By the time I reached college in the early 1960s, my black heroes had expanded to include civil rights leaders, educators, and business persons. By then, a few more television programs featuring blacks in more varied roles came onto the scene. However, there was always this underlying tension, in a lot of cases outright contradictions between what I'd been taught about my race and how we were being treated by Southern whites. This was in large part due to the fact that many people in this country, some of whom who had never encountered black people, still believed the degrading stereotypes of blacks that were portrayed on television. Everything they believed and knew about blacks was determined by what they saw on television and in the movies. My participation in civil rights marches, sit-ins, and demonstrations was inspired by positive black images coupled with the chant, "I'm black and I'm proud." More and more people of various races began joining our struggle for equality, and this was another source of encouragement. And while the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Bill were not yet passed, I began to envision a day when I would be able to go to the college or university of my choice, reserve a room in a hotel, and pursue a career based on my aspirations. Yes, we've come a great way from the time when Sam Lucas was the first black actor to have a lead role in a movie for his performance in Uncle Tom's Cabin. That was in 1914. But just a year later, another motion picture was released. The Birth of a Nation was released, and this film supported the white supremacist group known as the Ku Klux Klan. Many have characterized this movie as possibly the most anti-black film ever produced because of its vicious portrayal of blacks as less than human compared to the glorified depiction of the Klan. However, this devastating setback gave rise to the creation of a new industry that produced race films. There were 4 African Americans and about African Americans. This development created images that had not been seen before, and they were intended to dispel the stereotypical shifting, shiny face, head scratching simpletons with bugged out eyes, leaning on a broom, and speaking bad English. It became obvious that in order for blacks to ensure that they would have positive role images, they would have to make their own movies. And we experienced an era of blaxploitation films, which were popular in most black communities, but did very little to correct the image of blacks in the majority American population. The stereotypes of blacks is deeply ingrained in the psyche of the American public. Any content that attempts to alter that stereotypical image is uncomfortable for a lot of people. And they simply change the channel, not go to that movie, not listen to that program, or not read that book by that author. Additionally, one of the greatest challenges to generating black images that promote healthy attitudes towards blacks throughout American society is the persistent need for financial profits. The profits are needed to sustain the media, whether it's television, radio, the movies, digital, and of course, social media. This makes it extremely difficult to bring pressure on networks and film producers when their shows and newscasts are making money. This, of course, can be attributed to the positive portrayal of the majority and the negative portrayal of minorities. In this industry, the bottom line is money. So what are we to do? Is part of the answer having more media giants like Oprah Winfrey and Tyler Perry, Shonda Rhimes? Is it acquiring local news outlets and television stations? Or none of these? Should we try something altogether new? If it were not for the Black images portrayed in the movie Hidden Figures, how many of us would know about the contributions made to the American Space Shuttle program by Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan? Just imagine how many Black images and stories we are unaware until the opening of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And if we are honest with one another, the majority of us would be unaware of the images and stories of Josiah Henson until relatively recently. Therefore, we must call on our faith as Josiah Henson did and keep the conversation alive. A conversation designed to specifically improve race relations and social justice through more accurate portrayals of Black images in the media beyond Black Panther. Thank you.
Thank you, Hercules. Our next speaker is Wendy Howard. Wendy is owner and CEO of WH Consulting, vice chair of the Maryland Black Chamber of Commerce, the immediate past president of the Women Business Owners of Montgomery County Board of Directors. A native Washingtonian, Wendy is widely known as a local leader, supporting small businesses and promoting sustainable practices. She is the executive director of One Montgomery Green and has won numerous awards, including the Green Champion Award and the Rising Star Award. Welcome, Wendy.
All right. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Reed, for that kind introduction. I want to thank Mrs. Leggett, the Parks Foundation, and Montgomery Community Media, and all those working on this effort for including me. It's a wonderful enterprise, and I am really happy to be involved. This discussion of Black images in mass media is a broad and complex topic and extremely difficult to cover in a few minutes. But one of my esteemed panelists helped me put it into perspective by wisely suggesting we tackle the topic through the lens of our own experience and expertise. As a self-proclaimed videophile, a comic book fan, and a member of the baby boomer generation, oh, I told you guys my age, I have spent most of my leisure time watching movies and TV. I began my love of film at really a very interesting time, or a very interesting trend in Hollywood in the 60s, as Hollywood became more socially conscious, asserting itself during this time, these tumultuous 60s. No longer bound to the industry production code, which banned representation of sexual relations between Black and white people, African Americans began to move away from the singing, dancing, and cleaning roles available during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. During those early decades, or the golden age, most depictions of Blacks were seen through a white lens. African American male roles were typically what is characterized as the Tom roles. The Tom was a whitewashed version of Stowe's character. He was a Black man without sexual prowess, generally old, feeble, and accepting of whatever his white master asked of him. There were a few exceptions, but it wasn't until the 60s that we began to see a different image, where I began to see a different image. In the 60s, actors like Sidney Poitier brought a more complex, multi-dimensional character to the screen, instead of the one-dimensional Tom character. This is what I grew up with, and these are the images that have made an impact on me. Though some still characterize many of his roles as Tom roles, it's my opinion that he and the many actors who worked during those earlier decades led us to where we are now. I really think a significant change in these images came from the smaller screen. The proliferation of the color TV set, which became more common during the 60s because the price was cheaper, brought more colorful characters into our living rooms. Female characters seem to fare better than male African American characters. Characters like Diane Carroll shows Julia, in which she portrayed a single mother. Her Army captain husband died in Vietnam, but raising her son. This was something that really spoke to me. Shows like Room 222, Good Times, Roots, and of course Soul Train provided a contrast to the blaxploitation movies of the 70s, but I went and saw them all. Much of those TV shows, as opposed to the blaxploitation movies, were once again seen through this white lens. We begin to see a change in that with the 80s, the inception of shows like The Cosby Show, a groundbreaking show depicting an upper middle class family. This was something we hadn't really seen before. Oprah Winfrey, oh my goodness, she really brought to home into our television stations a woman of color who was strong, had a business, and was making money. And then, of course, something I didn't realize just recently, Sidney Poitier directing Stir Crazy, one of the highest grossing films made by an African-American director. We start to see real characters, not caricatures. They became more mainstream and were, and were more prevalent in movies. We started to see movies like The Color Purple, still though, once again, seen through a white lens. African-American directors like John Singleton and Spike Lee brought us Boys in the Hood and Do the Right Thing. Now we're starting to see things through a black lens. This trajectory continues to rise, however slowly, but allowing more directors to direct more mainstream movies. Roles for African-American men and women are growing, and a new black superhero came to the scene. It's not Black Panther, it was Blade. I don't know if you guys remember that. Catwoman in the 90s. And of course, leading to the ultimate superhero, Black Panther. I think we're experiencing what I think is really, truly a golden age. Last year, for the first time in the Oscars history, a black actor was nominated in every acting category in the same year, with Barry Jenkins' Moonlight winning Best Picture. The popularity of the movie Black Panther further illustrates my point of viewing the images through this different lens. Is this a natural evolution and an inevitable conclusion? I really can't say, but I'm pleased to be here, I'm pleased to see it, and I hope to talk more about it.
Thank you, Wendy. Our final speaker for this series is Richard Turner. After working in media for more than 30 years, Richard truly is an industry expert. A prominent figure amongst his peers, Richard's resume boasts top titles such as President and Owner. He currently serves on the board of directors for the Alliance for Community Media and is executive director at the Community Media Center of Carroll County. We are especially excited to have Richard here today because he is also the former executive director at Montgomery County Media. So Richard, welcome back. Please come up.
Well, thanks very much. Thank you, Ed, Tony, wherever you are back there in control room somewhere maybe, Michael, Catherine, my fellow panelists and guests. Having spent hours working to create this physical space in which we're sitting, it's heartwarming to see it used to convene and consider the impact of Reverend Josiah Henson and the struggle and accomplishment surrounding identity for peoples of the African Atlantic slave diaspora. I am the splintering of America. I am not the axe, not the maul, nor the wedge. I'm the pent-up energy released, unnoticed by most. I struggle with the notion of presenting. I'm the product of two educators, my father with a doctorate, my mother with a master's ABD. And I'm keenly aware I can't claim to have studied or researched this particular important topic. But I'm a practitioner of the field, as you heard, organizing media makers. So keenly aware about imagery and what happens with the impact of that imagery. When it comes to mass commercial media, I'm a cynic and yet an optimist. I guess that makes me a critic. That through analysis and persuasion, there will be an answer to the shortcomings I have observed, and with a call to duty, would expect some change. My objective here is to connect some of the dots in the short 10 minutes that we've got together, and discuss the biases in mass media, especially in the areas of television, film, and especially digital media, which is sort of my focus. Now, to comprehend critiques requires some context. Talk a little bit about the influence in my lives. And by way of introduction, I wanted to recognize, being that we just did Father's Day, let me share going back 3 generations and speak of the influences in my family chain, what brought me to here where I am today and on whose shoulders I stand. My maternal grandfather, Richard B. Moore, was influenced by Hubert Harrison. He was an early 20th century activist, writer, orator, and self-taught educator. He said, "Oldsters love ruts because they help them to rub along. They are easy to understand, they require the minimum of exertion and brains, they give the maximum of ease. Harrison urges us to shun a rut as you would shun the plague. Set it before you as a sacred duty, always to surpass the teachers that taught you." My paternal grandfather was Frank Turner. He was influenced by W.E.B. Du Bois, early 20th century activist, author, and sociologist. Du Bois said, "One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, 2 souls in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be both a Negro and an American, without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his face. I am the splintering of America. I am the energy release evidenced by the auditory crackle and pop of seemingly still life bound together, and the dust of 1,000 hardened cells being burst apart." Now, I'm going to attempt to spin this a little bit from what has happened, you've heard about history, to what is happening. It's interesting here about Birth of a Nation. I sat in a film, my first exposure to film when I was studying in high school. I think it might have even been the first film that we had to watch was Birth of a Nation. The only film I remember from that class. Certainly impressionable. Now, talking about Black Panther comes in at the 16th highest opening, only Afrocentric or Afrofuturistic fiction in the top 200 million mark for an opening day. That is, unless you count Ice Age, Dawn of the Dinosaurs, which came in at 55. Black Panther worldwide grosses comes in at 9th, with Lion King at 37th. Oh, right, that was an animated animal. So yes, this is an indicator of some progress, yet from over 3,000 Oscars, only 36 to Afro-Americans, 1 producer, no director. 3,000. So, how can we break this down? I'm not a cognitive neuroscientist, nor have I ever played one on television. I could don a white doctor's coat or talk with a British accent that would make you think perhaps I had a higher IQ. But instead, I'll dazzle you with my ability to enter a search term in Wikipedia. Now, brains love shortcuts. That's the way our mind works. It's our greatest strength, and on this topic of humanity, it's its greatest weakness. Our uptake is estimated at about 50 bits per second, about our information intake, relying upon prior conclusions to inform current problems, discounting new variables regardless of their frequency. Confirmation bias. The first thing we've come to understand and know, we continue to seek answers and explanations to reaffirm it's my original decision. In the world of neurological shortcuts, Africa becomes a country. despite being the second largest continent with 54 countries. It's just too difficult to remember Yoruba, Wolof, Igbo, or Zulu. Why choose from the 5-box crayon set? White, black, yellow, brown, red, when we could choose from the 64 or the 120 box set. Our shortcuts don't allow us to effectively consider alabaster, porcelain, ivory, honey, golden, almond, mahogany, almond, chestnut, espresso, or ebony. I'm a shade between golden and almond, but that just won't fit on the census form, will it? So the status quo bias reinforces a sense of conservatism in which change appears undesirable. Change would require rethinking and being open to considering prior conclusions were erroneous. Kenneth and Mamie Clark's doll test of children who demonstrated positive and negative attributes associated with color continues to be replicated and validated. In recent studies, even as recent as this year in collection, found that there was implicit association through implicit association testing, that there was bias based upon skin color that was evident as early as 6 months, but not earlier than that. So clearly, its association is a developmental characteristic. Ostracized or marginalized children exhibit increased behaviors of acting out or being less helpful, more aggressive, and ultimately completely disengaged. I am the splintering of America. I am not the shrapnel nor fragment, but the force that creates the sharpest point that can pierce the skin. The breaking apart of years upon years of attempts to remain right and rigid as a method for survival. So what purpose does media fulfill? Its purpose is somewhat storytelling. To understand storytelling is to connect the emotional and didactic in a form that provides the affirmation to I am. Storytelling invokes creation and construction of self. The dominant commercial media has usurped the ritual of storytelling, and it does so through reduction, then seduction. Let me boil this down into the simplest messages and then get your emotions to lock it in. Simply put, boy meets girl, girl likes smile, boy buys toothpaste. A medium of manipulation to aggregate the largest possible number of viewers. Children now in the age up to 8 years old, digital screen viewing up from 15 minutes in 2013 to 48 minutes in 2017. You've heard the statistics. According to the AMA, individuals were exposed to over 10,000 brand messages a day with over 21 screen switches in an hour and an attention span to 8 seconds. So new digital media tools are using personalization to drive reach and consumption. The algorithms that drive that search and that delivery and machine intelligence are served up by that personalized content is limited by the biases of the developers. So now we have a whole nother realm we need to be thinking about, not just in terms of creation producers, et cetera, but also what's happening in software. I am the splintering of America. I am the living proof that America had not lived up to its creed of a government of, by, and for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity. So here it is, that call to duty, and I'll wrap up because I'm getting the sign. Okay? Demand and fund digital media literacy starting in kindergarten. Empower the next generation with the tools to detect, deconstruct, and disable that which is not in their interest. Use digital and social media on your terms, not their terms. Finally, consider to make progress. We often reject the past as an inadequate means to a more vibrant future, such is the case with Josiah Henson. In our desire to make change, let's recognize those prior accomplishments within their respective contexts as progress in the long path to justice and reconciliation. From Jaron Lanier, when you change the contents of your circle, you change your concept of yourself. I am the splintering of America. I am not the axe, not the maul, nor the wedge. I am that which seeks the resonance of self-evident truths that all are created equal and shall be able to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you to all of our panel guests. Coming up, we'll be inviting our audience to join the conversation. But first, we have a short video to share. As you know, today's program is part 4 of our Josiah Henson Leadership Conference. We've been honored to host some phenomenal speakers throughout the series, as we are today. The clip you're about to see is from one of them. Stephanie Young joined us for our second Josiah Henson Leadership Conference, titled Self-Determination, Collective Responsibility, and Emancipation. At that time, Stephanie was working for the White House as President Obama's senior liaison to the African American community. She spoke to the importance of minority representation in the media and shared a personal story about the first time she saw a then Senator Barack Obama on TV. Take a look.
Way back when, in 2008, I still remember the day that he gave that speech on March 18th. Actually, it was 2007, I believe. It was in Chicago, and he talked about race. And I remember I was working at the NewsHour, Jim Lehrer, on PBS at the time, and I remember hearing him speak and looking at some of the other black folks in the room, in the newsroom, and just feeling like, oh my gosh, I've never heard a black person speak about race like this before publicly. It was almost like he brought that conversation out of the closet and spoke about it in a way as though to make you feel like my voice is being heard. He's speaking for me, he's speaking for us. And so much pride, but also so much relief in that moment because he really, I think, opened the eyes of so many people who might not have been tolerant, didn't want to really hear about it, and really maybe just didn't even think about it from their own experiences. And I think that's what's been so powerful about this presidency and this administration, simply the imagery, simply, the history of where they come from, and knowing, that slaves built the White House. And the First Lady just said that a couple of days ago during a speech when she was giving a commencement speech in New York, but just simply making that acknowledgement because we want to sweep it under the rug. I'm proud to walk into the White House every day and know that I come from a strong people, and knowing that that parts of my family were enslaved here in the United States and never could have imagined a moment like this. And I think that as we continue to move forward and as more people embrace that history in pride and instead of shame, I think that will do wonders.
All right, Q&A. We would like people to come up one at a time to ask any question of our panel that you might have. Just remember, it's called Q&A. Ask your question and everyone will answer. That way we'll have time to get to everyone. So the microphone is now open. All right, we have two. Make sure you get in line. Yes, sir.
I have a question for all the panelists. Today, with young people using social media primarily as their main source of news, what do you think we can do as far as the African American community to educate our kids and what to put on, or what social media avenues to look at?
Well, I'll start with, again, the importance of understanding how to deconstruct what people are watching or what they're consuming in terms of social media. Understanding its source. So I think that starts with mirroring that at home, what people do at home, what parents do, what the people who they look up to do in terms of making that kind of an impact. But I think it also will have to begin supporting and realizing that what's being generated in social media needs to have a support system to it. So when we look at how the whole funding of reliable sources and trusted sources are shifting, do we stop supporting the New York Times or Washington Post? Do we give up that subscription and let it be just something that we consume for free? And so we have to really closely evaluate what's happening with that social media construct so that we can be more aware of where are legitimate sources of information.
I think it's important that we actually participate. In other words, instead of just letting our children go on to social media, see whatever they want, you need to be on there with them. You need to see what they're looking at. You know, we used to, my family, we used to watch TV together. You know, I mean, we commented, we talked about it. I think that's how we get it. We have to be involved. We have to be more attentive and involved in seeing what they're watching, what they're looking at.
In addition to watching with them, we have to make sure that we instill in our children a sense of accountability. Simply asking the question, now, what did you get after looking at that particular social media? And if they can't articulate something, you begin to develop that critical thinking that they need to have so that they can make those decisions when you aren't around.
Good morning.
Morning.
So, in regards to Black Panther, what do you all think about the comparison of Chadwick Boseman's character to Martin Luther King and Michael B. Jordan's character to Malcolm X in that approach and message, even though they were both looking for the same result, just basically going from how they got there? And yeah, so what do you all think about that?
I think any opportunity that we have to show positive images of African Americans, and particularly to this broad audience. What I liked about Black Panther was that it was received worldwide by all types of audiences. And so for some people, it may have been the first time they'd ever seen an African American in that type of role. So from that perspective, very good. The other individual you mentioned, including Martin Luther King, we have to look at the time period and the context. I think that each were important in their time, and so each can be a giant or the one that leads to better understanding and a better appreciation of the whole of the African American in the world.
I love that analogy. I just think it's really interesting that people started to talk about that almost immediately after the movie, and I think it's very true in that we're trying to reach that same goal, and sometimes we have to come at it at different perspectives based on sort of our experience.
And to add to that, I think the discussion is great, having the debate about it, but let's put it into context. Who owns Marvel? Who framed that conversation in the first place? So to that extent, there's still many more examples of people who could be made of comparisons of what the prototype of the character was trying to portray. So it wasn't a documentary, right? So put it into context.
Next.
So thank you all for being here. This is very informative and I appreciate it. There are, I think, lots of opportunities to continue the changing faces of what's projected in the media and the images, and I think that starts with getting the appropriate people in the development phase and sort of getting people involved with developing these images. And I'm wondering what programs or initiatives are in place to help our youth move into these positions that can help sort of transform what images are portrayed in the media, and if you all are aware of any or anything pending.
Well, most schools and in particular community colleges have programs that allow students to intern or have experiences in the real world studios and that kind of a thing. So I would, if you're interested in your child getting involved in this particular industry, I would just check with the educational institutions that you're interested in to see what programs and opportunities they have available. There's nothing that can substitute for the real world experience. That coupled with what they get in the classroom is going to make for them having a future in the industry.
Yeah, I would just add to it, there are programs out there, and again, this gets into who owns the studios, who backs, who green lights. All of those are particularly challenges that are barriers at the moment. And so I think we'll probably see more in the way of bypass with new entrants into the movie industry or the entertainment industry that will probably tip that. And I think over time, immediately what we're seeing is a greater corporate consciousness, such that those changes are being made more by corporations than by other factors. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 5 years, how the events of what has occurred with Black Panther, for example, shifts and moves that particular dial. I think it'll be even particularly interesting in another 50 years whether or not Black Panther becomes the Uncle Tom.
Speaking of that, I'm interested in your perspective of the CIA character that they saved, and the actual relationship of the CIA to Malcolm. You know what I'm talking about. How you're talking about accuracy and the fame of this film, and you're talking about truth. So what would you say about the character, because they saved the CIA and he was like the hero, but in the real story they were the antagonists, they were the enemy. So we have all of this fame and we have the movies being seen worldwide, but there's still some gross inaccuracies in there. I'd like you to speak to that.
But the thing I liked about that was that it reversed the role that we had to play in the past, and that is we were the ones that had to be saved, and it was always them coming to save us. So just to reverse that, I think, had some redeeming value, if you will. So.
Very powerful. I think it is interesting, that it was perceived that way. But we were, saving him. We were saving the world, in fact. And I think it was very telling and wonderful to see. I've already seen it 3 times, so,
I think the quote goes something to the effect of, all generalizations are false, including this one. So we have to be careful that movies will make generalizations, because that's how they create plots in order to be able to fit a story within 90 minutes to 120 minutes. So we shouldn't be expecting truth in documentary work out of fictional film.
it was a comic book.
But stories are always being retold, right? So history is being retold and reconstructed. We need to guide that process as we go along, hold people accountable, hold corporations accountable.
All right, well, thank you. I want to just thank all of you for joining us today. I would like to thank the panelists and all the people that asked questions of the panelists. Now, this wraps up this part of the conference. Thank you.
important leadership conference. I am Mike Nordlilly, the Executive Director of
Welcome back to the Josiah Henson Leadership Conference. As we learned, Josiah Henson played a major role in giving back to the community. As we continue, our next topic for the panel is looking back and moving forward, nurturing Black fathers, sons, and brothers. Our panel today is Clayton Evans, Deputy Director of Arts on the Block, Carson Henry, Executive Director of the YMCA Youth and Family Services, Selena Mindy Singleton, COO of the National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education, and Gregory Wims, Rotary International Governor District 7620. Our first speaker is Clayton Evans. Clayton is an artist, educator, and father who has committed his career to championing children and enriching communities through the arts. He has collaborated with several nonprofits in Montgomery County and is currently Deputy Director at Arts on the Block. Welcome, Clayton.
Thank you very much. I am very grateful for being here. I thank Mrs. Catherine Leggett, the Montgomery Parks Foundation, Montgomery County Media, my fellow presenters, and the audiences. Thank you. Black boys in green houses. The city warms to your cries, and no one has water to cool the noise. We simply place the blame on the black boys and green houses. Your walls branch to many streets. Where do you go, black boys? Grown with grown men's toys in green houses. That poem was based on a series, it is based on a series that captures the humanity of a few young men of color who have aspirations, who have or had a father, who are sons, perhaps brothers, and perhaps aspire to be fathers themselves one day. Many of the photographs in this series were captured by the photographer Christopher Barclay, who is my art partner in this Black Boys in Greenhouses series. We are interviewing men of color, ages 13 through 30, to help extend their voices, sharing their aspects of their humanity as one proactive means for reducing the possibility of them being seen as a threat. Of course, for this to truly be effective, we wish to get these images out and the shared thoughts from the interviews of these young men out to as many people as possible, and that is our goal. I am a father, I am a son, I am a brother, who, despite entering the New York City environment that was particularly hostile to men of color during the late 80s, with several race riots, the crack epidemic, I was able to survive New York City. New York City was able to eventually evolve out of a very dark period, but there were always reminders. Always reminders. In 1989, a very brutal assault on a Central Park jogger was the catalyst for the poem that I just read. I was graduating Lafayette College. I did graduate Lafayette College, came back to New York City, and came back to a city that was once again hostile to young men of color. Many of you might know the story of the Central Park Five. Eventually, after serving 6 to 13 years of prison, the charges were dropped, they were acquitted, and the actual perpetrator admitted in jail that he was the sole criminal assault for this case. But the residue of that experience and those reminders that just keep coming back, it's hard to avoid thinking that you might be the next victim of sorts. Yusuf Hawkins, 1989, Rodney King, 1991, Amadou Diallo, 1999, Trayvon Martin, 2012, Michael Brown, 2014, Tamir Rice, 2014, Freddie Gray, 2015, Philandro Castile, 2015, and most recently, well, actually not most recently, unfortunately, but Stephen Clark, Sacramento, California, March 2018, was shot 20 times in his grandparents' backyard. He had a cell phone as his weapon. This is obviously not a complete list of the young men, and there were certainly many women of color who are lost to us before their time. You might have seen in some of the slides a picture of Trayvon Martin. Next to Trayvon Martin was my son, Alan Evans. Alan Evans stands 6'4". He is close to 200 pounds. He has a serious scowl. Only his little sister can make him smile consistently. He loves to wear his hoodie. He's not wearing it these last few days, thank goodness. But I have this fear that he might be the victim of someone who might not see him as a human being. Alan is certainly part of this series, as well as other amazing young men. A greenhouse should be a place to nurture young plants, to give them the right environment to grow and thrive. If left unchecked, if not tended to, or tended to in a wrong way, that sense of nurturing is lost. And the very plants that were once encouraged to grow are now deemed a threat. These young men are not threats. They are human beings with aspirations, and I hope a full life ahead of them. I'm tired of seeing rest in peace murals. They are certainly beautiful dedications to those people who have passed, but they should not be necessary. The series of photographs and paintings called Black Boys in Greenhouses shares aspects of the humanities of living young men of color as preventative measures for parents who love their children and for the young men who have hopes for their promising futures. The photographer, Christopher Barclay, captures images of these young men of color while I ask them a series of questions that range from what comes to your mind when you're thinking of love, to when do you feel you will die and how, to when do you feel most threatened, to what are your hopes for other Black boys. We try to capture the nuances of their expression, of their thoughtfulness in those photographs. I then take the photographs, I also take the audio from those interviews, and then I react to them via paintings. For me, the essential ingredient for nurturing my fellow fathers, brothers, sons of color is through the building of resilience, through education, through loving others, through communication, through leaning forward and sharing your humanity with another. I believe these are all skills that align well with the way that Josiah Henson lived his life. This is how I am trying to help nurture those Black fathers, sons, and brothers as I move forward through this experience with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Clayton. Next, we will hear from Carson Henry. Carson has worked in the youth development field for over 15 years and is currently executive director for the YMCA Youth and Family Services. He is also on the committee for the Montgomery County's My Brother's Keepers initiative and the programming committee for Leadership Montgomery. Welcome, Carson.
I am the grandson of Barbados, Ireland, and Puerto Rico. I am the son of Carl and Linda Henry. I am the husband to Ashley, and I'm the father to Emerson James Henry, the newest love of my life. Far too often, the narrative of fatherhood in a Black American family is characterized by absenteeism, neglect, or toxic images of negative masculinity, fear of crying in front of other people. I might change that today, to be honest with you, if I talk. That narrative is utilized to draw attention away from a very common image across our country today. Positive men investing in their community, mentoring young men of color, being friends to each other and supporting each other in their times of need. From stoops on crowded Brooklyn sidewalks to boardrooms to college campuses and ball fields across America, there are Black men in our community that are nurturing each other, preventing vicious cycles that have been destroying their community. That story does not often get told. These are ordinary men who do extraordinary things regularly. Today I'm going to tell you a story about one of those men. His story 34 years ago, Carson Emerson Henry Jr. held his son for the first time. That man spent the rest of his life trying to be a good father, a good husband, and a role model to his neighborhood and community. Little did he know that his journey would make him a father figure to an entire neighborhood. I lost my father last Father's Day. Almost exactly 1 year ago to this day, I found myself standing in front of a room of strangers and my closest family members, reminiscing to them about my father and what he meant to me. And I quickly realized that my father had played the role of father to an entire neighborhood of young people. Today I honor my father by reminiscing on the life lessons that I shared at his funeral once again for you, as we celebrate and honor a father who brought so many people to freedom and a new life. So today I'm going to share some of the life lessons that my father taught me through his life, and I hope you enjoy them and realize that every day Black men in this country are teaching these lessons to each other as we speak. Love your family. I don't know why or how he convinced me to get on a bus with him and go to East New York. But one day he said, "Let's go." And I was like, all right. I was a teenager, so I was less than enthused. After we got to the end of that bus ride, we ended up at an old Brooklyn apartment building that looked pretty disheveled. We walked in the building and I met a gentleman. His name was Alan Henry. I did not realize that was the first time I was meeting my grandfather's brother. We had lived only miles away from each other, and I had never known this man. I started going with my father to my Uncle Alan's house with regularity. We'd sit around this old rickety table as Uncle Alan cooked whatever meal he was bragging about for the day. He'd regale us with his criticism, current state of politics. He didn't even know what we were in for a couple years later. My father would talk about sports teams, and I would sit there and wonder what I had to offer this conversation. They talk about my grandfather, reminisce about his name being Garvey because he was so outspoken and so very loud, which is a trait I've learned that men named Carson, Emerson, Henry all have in common. What I wouldn't give to sit at that table again, just one time, with those men. The second life lesson my father taught me was to make and live with their difficult decisions. On September 11, 2001, I woke up in a dorm room in Delaware. I didn't understand what I was watching. I didn't think it was real. I thought it was just some sci-fi TV show. As I walked through the streets of Delaware, I realized that more and more people were talking about the same thing. And the more I heard about it, the more I realized that this was actually happening in New York. And what's worse, it was happening in the building in which my mom worked. Somehow, some way, I kept myself together, found my way to a cell phone, used my cell phone, and tried to call my father frantically. For those of you that experienced 9/11, you know that the phones were down for a very, very long time. I could not get through to my father. I finally was able to connect with my father, and I had never, ever heard him sound the way he sounded that day. That day, two men had to stand and beat each other's rocks because they weren't sure whether they were going to see the woman they loved the most in the world ever again. That was the moment I learned what love truly was. Listening to his voice, understanding what he was saying, hearing the excitement that he felt when he realized that she was okay. I don't even think it was about 2 hours later when I called him back and said, "I'm leaving Delaware. I want to be back with the family. I made a terrible decision." His answer was simple. "No, you made your bed, sleep in it." That's my dad. You learn your lessons the hard way. You make your decisions. Some of them are tough, but I think at the end of the day, he knew that I would always be looking back, thinking about the regrets that I might have because I ran away from or ran towards something because I wasn't being strong and standing in and with my decisions. I'm very glad that he encouraged me to stay. My father also taught me about math and spelling. Math in the sense that, although he took me to the track, OTB, and we gambled quite a bit, apparently I'm a good handicapper. His real life lesson was that the odds are always against you. He didn't say the odds are against you, black man. He just said the odds are against you. Truth for anybody. The reality is, he told me that I needed to be better, smarter, more compassionate, more caring, more honest than anybody else. I had to do everything I possibly could to change those odds. He didn't do it with fear or any kind of malice against the environment in which I was growing up. He did it with love and hope. He did it because his thought was, if he could instill that lesson in me, I would do everything I could to change the odds for other people. And I'd say he taught me spelling, but the truth of the matter is when I used to go to my father and say, "Hey, Dad, how do you spell this word?" he had one of two answers. First one was, "Go ask your mother." Second one was, "We got a dictionary, go use it." Two life lessons to be learned in there. One, either mom was smarter than dad, or two, that you have tools. You have to use your tools. You cannot rely on other people for everything. You have to learn to be self-reliant. And I'm grateful for him for that. Because he didn't give me things. He made me work for things. And finally, the last lesson that my father taught me is that you have to try to be the best person you can possibly be at all times. And in doing that, you will experience pain. And without pain, you cannot experience true joy or good. I learned that lesson through someone else as a reflection of my life to them through my father, which is a very roundabout way to say. I was sitting in Panera one day with one of my mentees, of which I have many. This is a young man whose father is absent, his mother was on drugs, and at the time we had been matched by happenstance to a board member that I had at the Y. I sat with this young man and we talked about things from Plato to Jay-Z to J. Cole and girls, of course. He told me one day while we were sitting at that restaurant that he was glad of his circumstances, that his mother was on crack, because if it wasn't for that, he would never have had the chance to meet me. That was one of the most heart-wrenching things I had ever heard a young person say to me. And when I reflect back on what it means to be a brother, a son, a father, a role model, a black man in America, I think about the two eyes that are always watching you. And for most of us, and now that I've experienced this, those eyes are normally eyes that we've created. I have a new routine. I come home every day. After long days of encouraging other people to pick up the mantle and change the odds for each other and themselves, I come home and I think about my wife and my child and how long she was sitting at home waiting for me to be at work, or while I was at work. I pick up my child to give her a break. I bring him upstairs, I put him on the bed, and then I change my clothes into my home attire. And one day I was standing there taking off my tie, and I looked over at the bed, and he was just staring at me. He wasn't crying, he was just watching me change my tie. And I realized that those eyes are going to be watching me for the rest of my life. I realized that there are eyes that have been watching me for my entire life thus far. I realized that I was now standing in the position that my father had stood my entire life. How I learned how to shine shoes, how I learned what a good knot is, how I learned how to treat your wife with respect and dignity. And as I think back to the lessons that I learned from my father and how they tie into Josiah Henson and his memory and what we're doing here today, I realize that the lessons that we learned from the past dictate what we are right now and what our future will become by what we do for the children and families and community members that see us as role models. So it's our job to be here. It's our job to be present where we are. And it's our job to make sure that those eyes that are watching us see nothing but beautiful love, grace, and hope, not only for ourselves and our immediate family, but for our entire community. Thank you.
Thank you, Carson. Our next speaker is Selena Mindy Singleton. Selena is an attorney, youth advocate, and COO of the National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education. Throughout her career, Selena has contributed to several causes in our community. As a lawyer, she has participated in precedent-setting suits supporting African Americans, immigrants, and minority communities. She also started the STEM Forum on Capitol Hill, encouraging youth involvement in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. Welcome, Selena.
Good morning. I come to you as the proud mother of 2 children, one of whom is a 17-year-old black young man. I was competent to do all the work that was done upon the farm and could run faster and farther, wrestle longer and jump higher than anyone about me. My master and my fellow slaves used to look upon me and speak of me as a wonderfully smart fellow and a prophecy of great things I should do when I became a man. A casual word of this sort, sometimes overheard, would fill me with pride and ambition, which some would think impossible in a Negro slave, degraded, starved, and abused as I was, and had been from my earliest recollection. But the love of superiority is not confined to kings and emperors, and it is a positive fact that pride and ambition were as active in me as probably they ever were in the greatest soldier and statesman. Looking back, those are the words of Josiah Henson: degraded, starved, abused, but proud and ambitious. What you saw and heard about in the first panel is the persistently distorted media and degrading depictions of black fathers, of black sons, of black brothers, depictions that contribute to the tired, negative stereotypes and the unequal opportunity in education, in criminal justice, and more. The image we see is inaccurate. We know it's unethical. We know it's disrespectful. The words and images demonize our fathers, our sons, and our brothers. They fail to demonstrate the full spectrum of black males. Important positive dimensions of our fathers, of our sons and our brothers are ignored. In reality, our sons are community leaders, they're church ushers, they're advanced placement scholars, they're gold medalist shot put winners, they're national winners of the NAACP ACSO Awards, the Academic, Cultural, Technological, and Scientific Olympics. They're members of the Young Diplomats programs. They are members of both the National Honor Society and the National Science Honor Societies. And this is just a short list. And I'm not just reciting this because I'm the proud mother of a son who has some of these attributes. I am talking about many of the young African males in Montgomery County, in Maryland, and in the country. This is the post-millennial generation, known as Generation Z. So how do we nurture our Black fathers, our Black sons, and our brothers? In this community, we lead with values, we share responsibility. And it is because, as a community, we have nurtured our Black sons and supported them that they have excelled. We reward our youth with the African American Festival of Academic Excellence in recognition of their outstanding achievement. We give them church scholarships and other scholarships. Our Black fraternities nurture. Omega Psi Phi, the Black fraternity founded in 1911 at Howard University, a historically Black university, has deep roots in this community. When the Munu chapter of Omega Psi Phi awarded the Scroll of Honor to several of our Black sons in recognition of academic achievement, County Executive Ike Leggett was there. Ike Leggett is and has been part of this moving forward journey. Earlier this month, 6 African American college-bound teens, Generation Z, joined the rank of Eagle Scouts. This is the highest award a Boy Scout may earn. Only 1% of African Americans earn this honor. The community of Black fathers and Black brothers and Black sons help them with this journey. This troop, Troop 96, is supported by the People's Community Baptist Church, a large African American church in Silver Spring. And when the Scouts needed to interview an elected official about citizenship in the community, one of the patches that they earn, Council Member Craig Rice was there. Moving forward, a journey moving forward. The Scouts also sought their own fathers as mentors. Rudy Singleton, my husband, community leaders, Reggie Bridges, who is a small business owner who also heads the Boys' Rites of Passage. And these fathers are and have been part of the moving forward journey. The day of our celebration, it was raining. And as you know, it's been raining here 40 days and 40 nights. So maybe it's about time for it to stop raining. But it was raining, and the rain was raining so hard it was raining sideways. We had on boots up to our hips. And state delegates Janelle Wilkins and Pam Queen were there to celebrate our youth, part of the moving forward journey. I chair the scholarship committee of the Cassandra Butt Scholarship for the Arts, and we award scholarships to the arts. And when I needed help identifying young people and outreaching to deserving youth, I turned to one of my Leadership Montgomery brothers, Clayton Evans, to help us figure out how to get youth these scholarships. Another Black father who is part of the moving forward journey. So now it's mid-June, and the Gen Zers have graduated from high school. And so now we're seeking programs and identifying initiatives to encourage and embolden these boys and young men to listen, to ask good questions, to recognize their strengths, to be independent and take ownership of their futures. We not only supported them and nurtured them throughout their high school years, but now they're college bound. So they're going to Morehouse and Hampton University. And we send them to HBCUs because we know how HBCUs nurture our youth. I work at the National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education, where we represent 105 HBCUs as well as predominantly Black institutions. And so we know the value of our HBCUs. But we also send them to The Ohio State University, where they have the Todd Anthony Bell National Resource Center on the African American male. And many of our young people go to the University of Maryland, where they have the Black Male Initiative. But despite these tired stereotypes, every single time they leave the house, we remind them no smoking, no drinking, no drugs. And of course, they get the eye roll. But they're older now, so they're driving while Black. They are flying while Black to visit colleges and universities and other certificate programs. As members of track teams, they are running while Black, and we know that that's a problem. They are shopping while Black. And so we need to remind them every day what we hope that they need to do. Put your hands on the steering wheel. So there's the talk that we give them. But in the stores, what do we tell them? We tell them go in and shop immediately and come right out. But then you look suspicious if you go in and come out. So we tell them go in slowly. But then they lurk around and they look like Trayvon Martin. So you can't shop quickly, you can't shop slowly. We tell them only hang out with a few of your friends. But you can't do that because it looks like you're in a gang. So just walk around by yourself. But then you're lurking and you look like Trayvon Martin. So what do we tell our young men? We give them these conflicting ideas about what it is that we want them to do so that they can stay safe. I started with the words of Josiah Henson, degraded, starved, and abused, but talking about pride and ambition. I will end with the words of another great man, words penned in a congratulatory letter sent to one of the Eagle Scouts I mentioned. And he says, "This achievement speaks to your role as a young leader in your community. And we hope you take tremendous pride in the hard work and your commitment to service that you brought to this moment. Young people like you give us great hope for the future." That was written by the 44th President of the United States, President Barack Obama.
Yeah, thank you, Selena. Our final speaker is Gregory Wims. Gregory has been volunteering in our community for over 30 years. His accomplishments, accolades, and awards are too long to list. But to give you an idea, he's partnered with over 60 nonprofit organizations. He raised more than $2 million for charity. He started the Victims' Rights Foundation and has received about 100 awards for his work. Currently, he is the governor of Rotary International and producer of Montgomery Matters, a television show here at MCM. Welcome, Gregory.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And as we honor the Reverend Josiah Henson today, my talk will be about how the church, and Granddad and Dad played a role in my life and how that spreads to those 30-some organizations that I've been volunteering with. So I'll first start with my grandfather, who was born in the late 1880s in Clarksburg, Maryland, where the Wims family started. And there's an elementary school there, Wims Elementary School, that is there, which contributes to the Wims family there. He was married, as I said, for some 60-some years and had 9 children. One of those 9 children was my father, Earl Wims. And my dad and mom were married for 65 years before my dad died first, and then my mom went on to heaven. The reason why I mentioned that I came from a family, granddad to dad, where marriage was so important. But not only that, they, in fact, were very much active in the church, like Reverend Henson. I myself, following in that footstep of my grandfather and father, am a lifelong resident of what we now call Goshen United Methodist Church in Gaithersburg, born into that church and still remain there, which is in itself history. But there, I started with ministering to our youth when I was just 13 years old. And I found out very early there that a lot of the youth that didn't have the family unit, the mom and dad together, the boys were very angry. And as we go now, we all know what we see in our schools, etc., that anger is expressed, unfortunately, and sometimes with violence. So I made up my mind then, I say by the grace of God, that when I became 18 and went to Montgomery College, that I would start my own organization to mentor young boys And of course, I wasn't married, had no children at that time. And with that started a long career of, number one, showing love. Boys, I had no idea who they were, with their backgrounds until we met, but showing that I loved them as an individual and showing them that through me, the grace of God was with them. And then it went on, as I graduated from Montgomery College, I was able to join the board of the Boys and Girls Club, and it's there for 21 years until last year. I came off of that board. I've literally mentored like 200 or 300 boys over that span. And I can tell you now, without a doubt, when we talk about men, fathers, and young boys, that if a boy doesn't have a man in his life, there's missing a large chunk of his life will be missing, because boys have to relate to other boys and other men. And although I didn't know a lot of those boys while I was at the Boys and Girls Club mentoring, of course, after 21 years, you get to know them all, and I go to the graduations, etc. But it was no doubt in my mind, in the minds of those young people, that it was a difference made from a man. In this case, it was me as a man, but I got that from my grandfather and my father. I want to take it a step further, though. As I became my own father, I have 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. It became obvious to me that we had another problem. As a good dad, and quote unquote, I'm not bragging, but as a dad that was spent a lot of times with my boys first, who were born, they ran into problems in the neighborhood because they saw children, other boys, that were angry because they had a dad and they didn't. And both of my sons literally got into several fights all through elementary, through middle school, because their dad was in their lives. But what did I do besides being the strong Christian father, mentoring my boys? I said, let me see these boys over the years, because this is over years that are bullying you and talking with you. And I started mentoring those boys. By the time they got to high school, I was their dad also. But the point I'm making is that boys need men in their lives. They also need to know that they are loved, even if someone doesn't know them, that they are loved. Now I want to talk about my daughter, because we talk about boys and men and fathers. What my father taught me, and he taught me from example. My father only went to the 3rd grade. Again, my father was born in 1915, so you know the history. Go back 1880 in Clarksburg. But he never once raised his hand against my mother. And I'm living in the house, and I'm the baby of our family. So I was there all the way to 19 years. And he never cursed at my mother. So that was the first thing that I learned from just observing. But when he talked to me, he said, Greg, I'm going to tell you a life story. One, if you make a commitment to get married, and it's going to be very difficult. There'll be times, and I'm married, thank God, 30 years this year to my wife. So I know there have been difficult times, but you have to hang in there. You have to believe in God, and you have to pray that it will work. So I learned those lessons from him. But when my daughter was born, he said, as granddad, he said, I want you to raise your daughter with the respect that I raised you, and the way I treated your mother, you treat your daughter. You give her that love as a father, because if she, in fact, knows that she's loved, and loved from a man, a strong Christian man, as he said, in my life, she will look for the Christian man to marry in her life. It's very simple. My father only went again to the 3rd grade, but it's very simple for him to put things in simple terms. And I would say that from that, at the Boys and Girls Club, I told you I mentored boys, but then I started mentoring girls, showing them that a man could be their mentor, love them without putting their hands on them or without making any type of sexual approach or whatever, because a lot of the girls at the Boys and Girls Clubs that I've worked with had been abused, not all of them, some. So they understood, but they understood from an uncle or a neighbor or a stranger that tried to take advantage of them, that a man can in fact be a man that helped. So as we celebrate today, Reverend Henson, who came out of that strong faith leadership, I would just say simply to you that my life has been mentoring to young boys, young girls, and of course my own children. And I'm proud to say, as I take my seat, I have 2 grandchildren. As it turns out, they're both boys. So they get to see granddad in action. And someone mentioned my 30 years or so of community service. My grandchildren are 13 and 11. And they've already committed to their community of volunteering, helping the seniors with grass cutting, helping open doors, et cetera, and so forth. And so, again, we as men have to mentor not only our children, our grandchildren, but the children we don't know. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you to all our panelists. Before we begin the Q&A, we like to show a short clip from a past Josiah Henson Leadership Conference. At the second installment of the series titled Self-Determination, Collective Responsibility, and Emancipation, we heard from Montgomery County Council member Craig Rice. Craig shared how civil rights struggles were discussed in his family and shared his unique perspective as a member of the movement's forgotten generation. Take a look.
I heard the stories as a young man growing up about the rural South and dealing with race and dealing with the challenges. So I heard it from my grandmother, who I was fortunate enough to be able to spend a lot of time with as we visited in the summers. And I think that oftentimes we forget about my generation. We talk so much about the millennial generation. We talk about all the different generations that are out there, but we forget about the one that's just removed. And I think that what you just heard about is so important because we also have a story to tell. Because we were the generation that came about right after the civil rights movement. So we experienced the change that happened, for good and for bad. I remember growing up and being in school when I was in the Magnet program, which was a gifted and talented program. And that was really when I first started to experience racism. Very upfront, to where because I didn't talk like some of the other kids, they called me Oreo, called me Uncle Tom. We were the recipients, our generation, because it was very interesting if we think about it. Our parents were very keen on making sure that we didn't suffer the same sorts of discrimination that they experienced, and were so intentional and so purposeful in terms of making sure that we had every single benefit possible so that we could succeed, that we actually moved so far away from a lot of our culture.
We would like people to come up one at a time and ask any question of our panel that you might have. Just remember, it's called Q&A. Ask your question and everyone will answer. That way we'll have time to get to everyone. So we'll start up. The microphone is open.
Hello, my name's Fred Evans, longtime Montgomery County resident, former principal of Gaithersburg High School, where Mr. Wims wanted to go, but he couldn't go. No, I'm just kidding. That's a whole long story. I'm sorry. What I wanted to, you all did a great job. It's fantastic. What I want to ask you is how we can improve the communication between races, and what folks who look like I do can do more effectively. One thing that I've done, and this will be short, is when I was born, my name was Frederick Samuel Ivosevic, Evosevic, Serbian ethnically. My mother and father and I went to an attorney's office when I was 4. I remember vividly sitting on a sofa and watching them get papers that they would sign. And what they were doing is going through the process of changing their name. My dad went from Dusan Ivosevic to Dan Evans. Wow. My mother became Catherine. She was always Catherine Evans, and I became Frederick Samuel Evans. There's a whole discussion, and I won't take the time now, when I finally asked them directly why they did that, and I clearly understand now why, wanting to fit in. So there are other situations in this country where the same kind of inappropriate actions toward people who are different occurred. And I'd like to just throw that at the panel. How do we get across some of those chasms?
much. Shall
You
I?
want to take it when we start right here to my left?
Sure. The large question, a very big question. No, it's a wonderful question. I think it starts on a grassroots level. I think some things that many of us have in common is if we can sit down at a table and break bread and have some provocative, challenging questions and really explore those, and truthfully share our honest, candid answers to those questions or those thoughts. I think that could be an effective way that we can break down some of the barriers, where we can learn so much more about each other, learn so much more about ourselves, and continue that dialogue. I think unfortunately it seems to be only during crises that we have to do this, and well, let's be proactive about that, and let's have these conversations 3 people at a time, 10 people at a time, break bread, and explore some uncomfortable questions or thoughts, but get them out there and hear the other sides.
So in our mentoring program at the Y, one of the things we recently launched is an initiative surrounding something called critical mentoring. Critical mentoring is a relatively new concept that explores the socioeconomic, racial, cultural norms that surround the young person's life. And what we do is we try to educate the potential mentor about the impact and role that plays on the young person, so that as they engage in that mentorship relationship, whether they're inside that young person's race or have a similar story that they might be able to relate to, they're able to explore that in a healthy way for the young person, so that that young person can process what the complexity of which the situation what they're currently being confronted with. To Clayton's point, I think that's more of an individualistic kind of approach to becoming an ally or supporting or trying to help elevate this. I think one of the first things that anybody that's not of color really has to understand, or at least acknowledge, before they can truly kind of support people of color, is their privilege. And far too often we hear stories of people that are ignorant of their privilege. They go see Black Panther and they don't actually take the time to think about what the bit larger meaning is. They gloss over the news story or article that doesn't impact their direct life. And to be perfectly honest with you, our system has not been set up for the African American person in it. And so almost in essence, to be a true ally to a person of color, there's almost a sense of ensuring that other people are receiving the privilege that you receive as you go through your life, or in a more extreme case, denouncing the privilege or the benefit that you get if it's not afforded to somebody else because of the color of their skin. I believe it was a Josiah Henson talk fairly recently, where a lady talked about a cousin who was could pass for white or Caucasian, and she was treated differently when writing a check at the grocery store. And the African American person, the speaker, felt uncomfortable. Sorry, I broke the rule. You're not supposed to hit your mic. They felt uncomfortable, right, as confronting the way they were being mistreated, because they thought they were going to be perceived as a toxic or negative influence in that encounter. And there was a positive, and then the person who passed or seemed Caucasian, who wasn't treated that way, spoke up on behalf of that African American woman. And the whole entire dynamic shifted. And so the more that people can find their way to look for that disparity and speak up on that other person's behalf, and realize that if that person does speak up, they're often targeted and villainized.
One of the ways I've seen young people actually do this is by participating in different service learning hour projects. And one of the things that I did not say was how many hours the young people I've seen have really participated in service learning hours. And doing it outside their neighborhoods, or doing it at Children's Hospital, or doing it in groups, which meant that they did, in fact, bring other children, young people, different races and ethnicities to the table. And so I thought that was really cool, as I've seen that over the years. The other thing is that I am the chair of the Manna Food Center Board of Directors. And one of the projects that we do have is a Breaking Bread series. And so we do that once a month, and anybody's invited to come in. And it's really, really interesting because it does bring in different people from the community, in addition to the staff, but the people that we feed every year. So we feed 30,000 hungry Montgomery County residents every year, and we do have this Breaking Bread series that we participate in monthly.
And I'd like to answer it in two different ways. One of the things I didn't say earlier, I'm the past president of the local NAACP and also the past president of the state of Maryland NAACP. So with that background and what I'm doing now with our nonprofits, for the adults, the thing that I try to do, because I'm a leader in most of these organizations, have, especially my white brothers, to simply speak up when they hear from their white counterparts in the private settings to say that's not cool. This is not something you need to do. And I'm finding that it's working now. I'm talking over 15, 20 years, because at my job where I work, the owner of the company is white, and he just 2 weeks ago said that they went to the CAPS thing, and someone said something negative about the N-word or something, and he said, wait a minute, let me stop right here. I don't appreciate it. I don't think you need to do that, and I will not come to another CAPS game with your son. So these are the kind of things that you have to do, and we do this as we talk with all of our groups, and especially through my church. Now, for the young people, we have an advantage in Montgomery County in particular, that we have so many from all over the world that are here in the high school. So they grow up together. They know and they're learning firsthand that we're all the same. We just come from different backgrounds. But what I try to emphasize with our young people, though, is law enforcement, police, community relations, especially as it relates to those of color. And we do workshops, not only the NAACP now, where Linda Plummer's the president, but in my church where we say, young boys, put your hands on the steering wheel, say yes sir, do not say why you stop, all these type of things. And what we're finding is, now this is again over several years we're doing this, that there's been in Montgomery County a more positive attitude, I guess you would say, among our young people that participate in this training with our law enforcement. There are a whole lot that have not participated, and there's a lot of problems, as we know. But to answer the question directly, Fred, to you, with our adults, we have to ask our white brothers and sisters, say, this is not acceptable. For our young people, we need to know, they know we're all different, but we need to also tell them that they have to know how to respect if they're stopped by an officer, because that could save their lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, that wraps up our Q&A segment.
Sorry.
That's all right. So I would like to invite Cheryl Spicer up from Montgomery Parks to discuss what is new with the Josiah Henson Museum.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. I just want to thank MCM for their continued support of our project and our own foundation, which has been really great in helping to spread the awareness into our number one cheerleader who's not with us today, Mrs. Leggett. Just really want to extend our thanks out to all of them and to you for coming out this fourth and fifth time. So what's been happening at this site that we purchased over 12 years ago, this tiny little house on Old Georgetown Road in North Bethesda that was home to a plantation owner, Isaac Riley, but also was home to a most remarkable man that a lot of people don't even know lived there much of his enslaved life, and that's the Reverend Josiah Henson. So we've been really, really busy this past decade. We have conducted extensive ongoing archaeological excavations with over 20,000 artifacts that have been recovered from the site. They're still digging. today. In fact, they're digging. And we've also provided tours to thousands of school students throughout the county. Most recently, through a grant project, the foundation brought us thousands of students from Title I schools from DC as well as Montgomery County. And then we've also been conducting research, and I say loosely because I'm going to introduce you to this powerful sister over here that has been working on research on Reverend Henson to help us produce these phenomenal professional exhibits that are coming to the new museum, but to a new publication that you'll be able to have in your hands very soon. And with that, all of that leads to the culmination of the expanding of this small historic site to this world-class museum and education center. We've just completed our design phase of the project. We're hoping to start construction early winter this year, around November. And with that, that's going to incorporate beautiful exhibits. We've enlisted the work of original artists so that you'll see original art, both indoor exhibits as well as those that are going to be outside. And all of that is because of you. We have been hearing from Mike Nardolilli for a couple of years now about our fundraising for this project, and you all have been helping very much to get us off the ground, to get us going, and we're going to be launching yet another community-based fundraising project. In your seat, you have a flyer that speaks about a commemorative paver program that we're going to be kicking off this month, where you can follow the legacy of Father Henson in leaving a mark. These commemorative pavers are going to be engraved with a meaningful message and placed all along a path that takes visitors from our parking area in the beautiful Wall Local Park, which is kind of cat-a-corner across the street from the site, and then throughout the site. And with these engravings, you'll be able to share in these memories and leave it in perpetuity at this site. You're going to help to build this site. This is your moment to participate at a variety of levels. So you'll learn more about that when you visit our website. But today, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to one of our Starch co-workers and lovely, lovely, lovely historian who has produced a phenomenal definitive biography of Reverend Henson. It is called Sharp Flashes of Lightning Comes from Black Clouds: The Life of the Reverend Josiah Henson. And with this book, I'm going to let her talk about it, but it is phenomenal. It is, think of it as your biography and textbook together. With this book, we get to see this vision of the man growing up in this enslaved environment here within Montgomery County and Maryland. I can't say any more. It's all on Jamie. So I will turn it over to my colleague, Miss Jamie Coons, who is our senior historian for Montgomery Parks, and then we'll tell you how you can get your copy. Come on down.
Good afternoon. I'm so humbled to follow all the speakers today. You guys are truly inspiring, and I'm so glad the book is technically not done. I still have the time to make a few changes, and I might actually make a couple of changes based on some of the things I heard today. And again, you guys were great, so thank you for having me here today. And this is really the first time I've pitched the book, so I might have a hard time containing myself. I'm really excited to be here. But if you'll let me indulge myself, I wanted to talk about how I was introduced to Josiah Henson, and I think a lot of people are like me. When I went to work on my PhD at the University of Delaware, I had an internship at the Delaware Historical Society, and I was working on a traveling exhibit on the Underground Railroad. And I had never read Uncle Tom's Cabin. It took until me working on a PhD to familiarize myself with that book. And I read the book, and then, of course, I had to read The Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin. And if you haven't read The Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, that's really where people in the 1800s realized who the model was for Uncle Tom. And Josiah Henson was one of multiple people, but he was almost like a footnote to this major event in American history. And historians like me, we love footnotes. That's where the juice is at. That's when you get a book, you go straight for the footnotes, and that's where you dig around. And I feel very privileged to be in the position to take Henson from the footnote and make him the standalone. And that's what we're trying to accomplish, not only with this book, but with this museum. As many of you might have already visited the museum in Canada, they've been focusing on Josiah Henson for decades. It's our time to catch up. We've been talking about Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman here in Maryland. Well, Josiah Henson's on the same parallel. He's the same statue, and his book had a major role in overturning the institution of slavery. And that's really an important story for us to tell at the museum. I actually brought a copy of the book, and again, it's still getting tweaked, but I wanted to read you a quote from the book, and I was so glad to hear folks having quotes from Henson in their talks today. But this is a quote from Henson's book. "Sharp flashes of lightning come from black clouds, sprightly words of wit come from those who live in dark hovels, and bright gleams of intelligence come from children brought up in the most abject ignorance of books." And the reason why I selected that quote to be the title for the book is I really wanted to emphasize Henson's words and his memories. And if you've never read Henson's book, I would encourage you, if you're going to spend money on a book, buy his book. And better yet, you can actually access it for free online through the University of North Carolina. Documenting the American South has 2 editions of his narrative. So if you've never read it, maybe this summer, if you're looking for a good read, go online and read it. But the reason why I picked those words is because we want to give agency to the words and the memories of those enslaved. And many people like Henson did not learn how to read and write. So he dictated his memories and his words. Other people eventually did write down their words. It doesn't matter how it was captured. The important part is that now, here in the 21st century, we can give agency to those words, and we're trying to do that very hard at the museum. And as she mentioned, we've been working on this project off and on for 10 years now, and it really has been my privilege to do research on Henson. I even put in acknowledgments. He's like a 4th member of my family. I've been researching him so long, my family knows who he is like the back of their hand. But and, you know, Henson's book went through many editions, and I felt like the best way to tell his story was to go through every edition and highlight his timeline, go through every edition and supplement that with other primary sources available from his time period. You know, earlier the panel was talking about media, and Henson really knew how to maximize that, not only in newspaper articles, but just his actual image. And I made a point of including as many images as possible of Henson in the book. We're so fortunate to be in a position to give him agency at this museum and to present his story with accuracy and authenticity, and to fulfill the thematic goals that we identified in the facility plan process, and to allow those that were enslaved to talk about their experience during enslavement. The book also talks about his relationship with the term of Uncle Tom and how he dealt with that before his passing. The book has over 109 illustrations, many of which are from his 1879 edition. And again, many images of himself. And I just want to wrap up in saying that it takes a village to write a book. And many people have helped me. You guys have helped me. Just some of the conversation that occurred today. Visitors have come to the park that have piqued my curiosity. And I'm so thankful for that. And I just want to end, it also takes a village to open a museum. And if you purchase this book, every penny goes to the proceeds of operating the museum. And that's really important. We want to get this museum off the ground so everyone, starting from young children to senior citizens, learn about Josiah Henson, and they learn the value of slave narratives and their role in educating our public about the institution of slavery. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes today's leadership conference. I want to thank our panelists for the information that they shared with us. I want to thank our audience for participating in all the great questions that were asked. I want to thank Montgomery Parks for keeping history alive. If you would like to contribute time or money or both to this project, you can go to montgomeryparks.org if you would like. I encourage you to do so. Lastly, thanks to MCM for hosting this event and providing the live stream. Go to mymcmedia.org to find out more about them. Thanks again. My name is Ed Reed. Have a great day.